You awoke with your body heavy upon the cold sand, the sun still shyly tinting the horizon with pale orange. Your breath dragged a bitter taste as the dry scent of earth and fine dust clung to your rough skin. The sweat from the night before had dried, and the ropes binding your wrists still stung, reminding you of your existence. The distant sound of hammers beating rhythmically echoed over the hills, blending with the tired groans of others like you. Today, as every day, you would carry heavy blocks and shape buttresses, repeating exhausting movements that dragged your body to the limit. The smoke from clay ovens mingled with the sharp smell of the sour sweat of men and women trapped by the same fate. And in the midst of this arid landscape, there was one detail that lingered like a weight in your throat. The silent ceremony you must endure, serving the authorities directly. A gesture that could mean the difference between a slightly easier life and the silent sentence of death. Every act, every step, was measured by the immense shadow of the tomb, about to be born beneath your wounded fingers, while the sun lazily climbed above the endless desert. The silence in the arid desert had a weight you would never forget, a cold promise squeezing your lungs even before the sun rose fully. You noticed how the vast field of sand stretched endlessly, dull gold faintly illuminated in the morning light. The air was dry and heavy, each breath a whisper against your cracked lips. The ropes on your wrists scratched against your skin as you shifted your position slowly, the rough texture biting into your flesh. Around you, the steady hammering sounded like a distant heartbeat, steady and relentless, punctuating the desolate morning. You felt your feet sink slightly into the sand as you stood, the gritty grains tickling between your toes. The chill of the night still lingered on the stones beneath, and the rough walls nearby shimmered faintly beneath the horizon's glow. The sun's ascent was sluggish, casting long shadows that stretched lazily across the bleak landscape. You inhaled the scent of dry dust, mixing with the acrid smoke curling from ancient ovens, the odor thick with the sweat of countless bodies forced to endure the same fate. If today's greatest frustration in some distant future might be losing a Wi-Fi connection, here every breath of sand was a harsh reminder of an invisible prison far more real. You had no escape, only the endless repetition of labor, the relentless burden of stones that seemed to carve themselves into your flesh. Yet, oddly, there was a strange comfort in the routine. The repetitive motion of lifting, placing, shaping, as if the weariness forged a rhythm as natural as your own heartbeat. The heat soon grew oppressive, a dry weight settling on your back as the sun climbed higher. The blocks you hauled felt heavier with each step, the rough edges biting into your weary hands. Around you, quiet groans rose softly, a chorus of exhaustion shared by those trapped alongside you. A rhythm of work was slow and steady, almost meditative, pulling your focus away from the harshness into a dull trance of motion. A subtle glance crossed between you and another captive nearby, a flicker of shared understanding, a silent acknowledgement of the burden carried together. That brief spark was a fragile thread holding some small hope. But then, the steady clatter of tools ceased abruptly. The murmurs faded into a tense hush that rolled like a wave through the dry camp. Everyone's breath seemed to still, and you caught a sharp look, urgent and unspoken, passing like a shadow. Something unusual was coming, something that demanded waiting in silence, the kind of ceremony that could tip the scales between survival and surrender. Hey, before Morpheus takes you fully, check if you're still subscribed. Sometimes the button disappears, and I don't want you missing the next sleepy stories. Take a moment and leave a like, soft as a pillow. Tell me in the comments, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Your interaction keeps this quiet corner alive. Thanks for being part of it. You shifted with care, the grainy warmth of the sand beneath your knees, pressing unevenly against your skin. The quiet gathering around you was like a held breath, an unsure, waiting, suspended in the heavy morning air. The ritual, as always, loomed like a shadow just at the edge of everything, folding the day into a tense stillness. You noticed how the others around you mirrored your careful movements, each one tethered to a fragile thread of hope and fear, their eyes flickering toward the distant form of the authority you must serve. The sun was now a pale disk climbing slowly and spreading its thin light over cracked stone and parched earth, the heat just beginning to gnaw at the back of your neck. Your fingers itched beneath the coarse ropes, the fibers cutting softly but insistently against your skin. You flexed your hands slightly, the sensation sharp and dull all at once, as if testing the limits of endurance the day would demand. The weight of the smoke lingered thick in the air again, a dense, sour smell mingling with the dry dust and the faint saltiness left behind by sweat dried under the relentless sky. Somewhere nearby, a faint scraping of stone whispered as someone began the slow, laborious task of shaping the next heavy block. The hollow thuds of hammers echoed methodically, their tired rhythm steady as a heart trapped in long hours of strain. You shifted your gaze toward the path leading to the center of the camp, where the lines of captives began to converge, moving with the careful precision dictated by unspoken rules. The silent ceremony was about to start. The thought made the air in your chest feel heavier, your breath clinging to the rough texture inside your throat. You took a hesitant step forward, feeling the coarse grit shift beneath your feet, small, restless particles pricking through the thin soles of your worn sandals. Every step felt like a pulse, slow and deliberate. The warmth of the sun was uneven, sliding in patches across the uneven ground. while a faint breeze stirred, carrying with it the sharp scent of dry leaves and a distant hint of smoke, like the ghost of an extinguished flame. The circle of captives tightened as one by one each was called forward. You felt the subtle tightening of nerves ripple around you, a shared tension threading through the crowd. The light shifted, casting long shadows across weathered faces, faces marked by exhaustion and the constant strain of silent servitude. Your own skin pricked with anticipation, every nerve stretched taut under the weight of what was to come. You heard the soft scrape of sandals against sand, closer now, footsteps measured and slow, echoing in the vastness of the camp. When your name, or rather the sound that called you forward, arrived in a sudden break of stillness, you rose carefully, the fabric of your clothes whispering against your skin. Every movement was slow, deliberate, as if the air itself demanded reverence. As you stepped into the circle, the silence seemed to thicken, folding around you like a cloak. The ground felt colder beneath your feet, the shadows deepening, swallowing the uneven light. You noticed the roughness of the stones pressed underfoot, sharp and real, contrasting with the dry softness of the sand behind you. Your hands were pulled gently but firmly toward the center, the rope slackening only slightly as the ceremony began. You sensed the presence of the authority nearby, a tall figure cloaked in dusty robes, watching intently. The air smelled of incense now, faint and bitter, crawling beneath your skin like a secret you could almost hear, but never speak aloud. Your breath was shallow but steady, the taste of dust and smoke mingling with the faint saltiness of sweat. The silence was profound, a thick pressure that pressed on your temples and tugged at the edges of your vision. You were guided to kneel before a small altar, carved from sandstone, its edges softened by time and endless touch. The rough surface pressed against your palms and knees, grounding you. The warmth of the sun had shifted higher, now casting an amber glow that softened the harsh contours of the camp, but deepened the shadows spilling beneath ancient stones. The crowd's murmurs had stilled into a collective quiet, like the calm before a storm that never truly arrives. Your thoughts flickered, brief and fleeting, but you pushed them away, focusing on the slow, steady beat of your own heart in your chest. A slender hand reached out, placing a heavy bowl filled with dark water before you, a symbol you knew of what was to come. The water shimmered with the reflections of the sun, calm and inviting, yet unnervingly still. You lowered your hands slowly, fingertips skimming the surface, the liquid cool despite the heat pressing down. You felt the fine tremor running through your arms as you hesitated, your mind grasping for any distraction. The silence clung to your skin, pierced only by the faint crackle of wind stirring dust, a sound that seemed magnified in the vast emptiness. The weight of the moment pressed deeper, and you bowed your head, feeling the rough fibers of your hair brush against your cheeks. The air was thick with anticipation, filled with the unspoken hopes and fears of those waiting. Somewhere, a single crow called, its caw sharp and distant, momentarily breaking the stillness only to restore it ever more solidly afterward. You inhale deeply, tasting the dryness of earth and smoke once again, letting the ritual settle like a stone inside your chest, heavy but unbreakable. And then, just as the air seems suspended in time, a faint movement shifted the horizon, a shadow flickering against the sun's slowing ascent, stretching long and ominous across the desert's edge. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but the change was real. The circle of eyes around the camp tightened. The quiet, collective breath held once more. Whatever came next, it would arrive soon, carried on the still, baking wind. You lowered yourself slowly from the altar, your knees pressing into the rough sandstone, the coarse grains digging quietly beneath the fabric of your worn garment. The bowl of dark water remained before you, still shimmering in the light that had now grown warmer, bathing the camp in an amber haze that softened but did not hide the sharp edges of your surroundings. Around you, the silent circle of captives held their breath, every eye fixed on the quiet tension threading through the air, a fragile line balancing between calm and something uncertain, just beyond knowing. Your wrists ached where the ropes bit into your flesh, the raw skin insisting with every twitch and shift, a brutal reminder of the life you carried like a shadow locked just behind your ribs. You straightened slowly, shifting your weight with a careful slowness, feeling every grain of sand pressing against the thin soles of your feet. The dust, dry and fine, stirred with movement, wrapping around your ankles like old memories refusing to fall away. The wind, barely more than a whisper, traced pale currents across your skin, carrying the faint, persistent smell of smoke and stale sweat that lingered even as the day climbed toward its harsh crescendo. There was a rhythmic beat in the distance, the hammering of stone continuing, steady and relentless, like a pulse you could almost lose yourself in if you tried. The soft scrape of sand underfoot punctuated the sound, each tiny grain sliding and shifting with the slow steps of those around you. You noticed how the faces nearby were fixed and blank, eyes narrowed in careful watchfulness, bodies tethered to the same exhaustion that pressed on you like a physical weight. The atmosphere was thick with a tension that refused to break, a collective breath held in waiting. As you walked back to your place, each movement was measured. The rough stones beneath the camp's edge felt scorching heat on your back. You pulled your shoulders taut, careful not to make any sudden move that might draw unwelcome notice. Your hands flex slightly, the muscles aching beneath the layers of grime and dried sweat, finding momentary relief in the faint motion. The coarse ropes creaked softly as they shifted with you, the fibers rough and unforgiving as the desert wind brushing over cracked earth. The shared silence carried a quiet urgency, like a thread pulled taut at its breaking point. From the far corner of your vision, you caught a flicker of movement, a shadow swiftly crossing the ridge beyond the camp. The sun, nearing its climb toward the zenith, cast long and distorted shapes across the sand, and the shifting light seemed to wrap around that motion with a strange stillness, as if the desert itself was holding breath. A sudden scrape echoed sharply through the air, the distinct sound of a sliding stone, and heads turned. Your heart paused in that suspended moment, ears straining against the backdrop of pounding hammers and ragged breaths. The authority figure, cloaked and distant, stepped into view at the center of camp, his eyes scanning slowly over the assembled captives. The air grew heavier, as if the scent of incense had thickened, wrapping itself in a palpable shroud, bitter, sharp, and unyielding. Your gaze met the gaze of another captive nearby. A brief, flickering connection, raw and wordless. There was no comfort to be found in it. Only the sharp clarity of shared fate pressed into the silence. A bead of sweat rolled slowly down your temple, trailing hot and sticky as the sun rose steadily, its heat beginning to bleed into every corner of the camp. You swallowed, the dry scrape of your throat evident, and shifted weight from one foot to the other, feeling the unsteady softness of sand settling beneath your boots. The procession began again, one by one, names called out in low, gravelly tones, voices strict of warmth, carrying the weight of unspoken warnings. The light shifted with each step forward, and you felt the slow tightening around your chest, a hollow squeeze that no breath could fully release. The footprints pressed in the sand ahead of you were uneven, the last mark of one who had walked the path. Each step a fragment of a story caught between hope and despair. When your name finally came, it was like a slow unraveling. You moved with the deliberate caution of one walking a fragile line, each step measured against the distance your body could bear. The rough stones greeted your feet once more as you crossed into the circle, the crowds watchful, eyes folding around you like heavy fabric. The sun's glare was merciless now, burning through the thick air, while somewhere close, small particles of dust rose in a delicate swirl, catching the light like forgotten sparks. You knelt again before the altar, the air dense and trembling with silent expectation. Your hands, still constrained, brushed once more the cool edge of the bowl, the liquid surface reflecting molten gold from the sun. The slow heat pressed on the back of your neck, sweat beginning to bead along your spine. Yet as you fixed your gaze on the shadowed horizons, the air itself seemed to pulse with something new. A presence just beyond reach, a quiet unease threading through the desert, like the faint tremor of wings beating softly in the distance. A distant murmur rose briefly, barely above a whisper, and vanished. Breath of the wind. Your chest tightened again, the steady beat of your heart, a fragile drum beneath the swelling tension. You felt the edge of something unresolved, a moment hanging poised on the sharp edge of time itself, waiting to fall. And then, just at the corner of your vision, the wind shifted, carrying with it a scent unfamiliar and sharp, like the faint trace of smoke from a fire long extinguished, or a shadow moving slowly across the edge of day. Your eyes narrowed, every nerve alert, caught in the quiet promise of change looming just beyond the shimmering heat. The desert held its breath, and you waited, suspended between what was and what might come next. You lowered yourself slowly from the altar, feeling the rough grains of sandstone bite gently into your knees. The heat had settled firmly now, a relentless force pressing down. Through the thin fabric of your clothing. Around you, the silent circle of captives held its breath, the dusty air thick with unspoken weight. Your wrists ached where the ropes had worn raw lines in your skin. The sting, a persistent reminder of your place in this harsh world. As you stepped back, your feet sank slightly into the warm sand, the tiny grains prickling between your toes, sticky with the residue of sweat and dust. The vague outline of the authority figure lingered in your peripheral vision, his presence a dark stain in the muted glow of the morning. The scent of ancient incense had begun to fade, replaced by the sharp, metallic tang of tension that wrapped itself seamlessly around the crowd. Moving away from the center, every step was cautious and deliberate. The cracked stones felt uneven beneath your sandals, each rough edge a contrast to the soft, shifting ground. The sun climbed its slow path, shaking the shadows and bathing the camp in a faint amber light that blurred the sharp details of your surroundings. You felt the sweat bead at your temples, the coarse fibers of the rope pulling tight with every slight movement of your wrists. The rhythmic pounding of hammers resumed, weaving its steady pulse through the background, like the heartbeat of a stubborn giant that refused to rest. The noise was a dull hum, yet it brought a strange familiarity, grounding you amidst the persistent swirl of uncertainty. You glanced sideways and caught a glimpse of a fellow captive, his eyes dark pools flickering with a mixture of resignation and defiant silence. In this shared exhaustion, there was a fragile tenderness, like an unspoken pact to endure through whatever came next. You shifted your weight again, the heat pressing heavier against your back. Fingerprints of dry dust clung to your skin, cracking alongside the sweat that had dried while you knelt. The air tasted bitter and arid, each breath a slightly burning trial. A faint wind stirred then, carrying with it the scent of scorched earth and a ghostly hint of smoke, as if distant fires refused to die quietly. The dryness seemed to scrape at your throat, coaxing a quiet cough that you swallowed quickly. The camp felt suspended in a fragile balance, neither fully still nor hurried, held in the taut space between care and despair. Footsteps shifted softly as captives rearranged their positions, voices low whispers blending with the restless wind. Your ears caught the scrape of sandals against sand once more, slower and heavier now, as if marking the end of some unseen ritual. You found yourself drawn slowly toward the edge of the work area, where the stacks of stone blocks stood in uneven piles, caught in the lingering amber light. The rough surfaces of the stones were mottled with dust and sweat, worn edges softened slightly by endless handling. You reached out, your fingers tracing the uneven coolness beneath the coarse grit, marveling briefly at how this immobile weight had become the axis on which your existence turned. A small spider skittered across the next block, its delicate legs tapping silently against the stone. You watched the tiny movement, captivated by how something so fragile could persist in this unforgiving place. The sight sparked a fleeting warmth deep inside, an ember of something like hope, but it was quickly swallowed by the heavy silence around you. As you lowered yourself onto a that brooked no argument. Hearts pounded in the captive circle, breaths hitching like a whispered warning. Your body tensed instinctively, muscles coiling with slow, deliberate preparation. The sun flickered through the heat shimmer, throwing moving shadows across the gathering. You stood, the salty sweat slick along your spine, prickling your skin as you moved toward the center once more. The steps were measured, each one a conversation between your will and your exhaustion. The sand beneath your feet shifted with quiet protests, sliding softly as you advanced through the circle. The watchful eyes of the others bore into your back, heavy and relentless, and yet there was no solace to be found in their gaze, only a shared acceptance of the peril woven into this day. The altar awaited silently, sunlight catching the faint cracks that webbed across the aged stone. You knelt, the coarse texture biting lightly into your knees and palms once more. The heavy bowl of water, dark and glassy, stood before you, as still and inviting as a mirror. Your fingertips hovered, hesitating above the liquid's oily surface, feeling the almost imperceptible coolness wrap itself around your skin. Your breath caught with the weight of all that was unsaid. The ritual's slow progression felt like a bridge stretched between dread and relief, each moment suspended in a fragile balance. The silence thickened, pressing against your temples as your eyes flicked to the horizon, where the desert stretched vast and indifferent beneath the relentless sun. Somewhere beyond, A faint rustle stirred the dust, subtle but undeniable. Suddenly, the wind shifted again, sharp and unexpected, tugging at your hair and the edges of your garment. The scent it carried was strange this time, no longer the familiar smoke or dry earth, but something colder, sharper, a faint trace of something burning far away. Your senses sharpened, every nerve prickling with quiet alarm beneath the overwhelming heat. You blinked against the brightness, trying to pierce the shimmer of rising waves ahead. The circle tightened, eyes narrowing instinctively toward where the motion slipped, just at the edge of your vision, where the desert wavered like a living thing, caught between reality and memory. The murmurs had faded completely now, swallowed by the oppressive weight of anticipation. You felt the slow pulse of fear tingling beneath your skin, a silken thread wound taut, ready to snap. And then, the authorities' distant voice carried again, drier this time, edged with a new urgency that shivered across the bleached stones. You were frozen, knees pressed hard against the sand, heart hammering a hesitant rhythm. There, on the far horizon, beyond the endless shimmer of heat, a figure appeared, thin, ragged, moving with a purpose that stirred the still desert air. The shadow stretched long and fragmented, a slow promise of change, rolling across the sands like a secret finally unleashed. You stood motionless for a moment longer, the harsh sunlight pressing against your back like a stone laid heavy and unmoving. The shadow from the authority figure remained fixed at the camp center, distant, almost part of the arid air itself. The faint scent of smoke lingered, thin and insistent, intertwining with the ever-present dust that clung persistently to your cracked skin. Each shallow breath you drew tasted of earth and ash, a bitter contrast to the stale dryness settling deep in your throat. The shuffling of feet stirred around you again, quiet but deliberate. Your eyes flicked to the edge of the camp, where the sand shifted unevenly beneath worn sandals and bare toes. The stones piled there caught the light in dull glints, their surfaces chipped and blistered by relentless sun. You felt the coarse pull of your ropes as you adjusted your stance, muscles tight with lingering ache. Your fingers flexed slowly, tracing the abrasions left behind, like invisible marks of a day that stretched itself long and unforgiving. A wind, faint and intermittent, whispered through the broken cracks lining the ground. It carried with it a subtle hint of smoke once more, but this time sharper, as if a new fire had slipped quietly beyond the horizon, untouched yet not forgotten. The air seemed to thicken, folding softly in the hush that had settled, pressing against the camp, as if holding its breath for what might come. You moved deliberately toward the scattered blocks, your bare feet sinking slightly into the sun-warmed sand. The rough texture of the stone under your palms, cold, a reminder of the weight you bore daily. Each block was a monument to endless toil, the surface gritty, dusted with a fine layer of grime that caught the heat and shimmered faintly. You traced the worn edges, feeling the contrast between sharp corners and areas smoothed by countless hands, silent witnesses to a routine you had come to know too well. Around you, others moved with the same slow deliberation, their forms etched softly against the sunlit haze. A fragile connection sparked in a hesitant glance, eyes meeting briefly, mirroring weariness, quiet endurance, and a muted conversation between the suffering. The quiet was filled with subtle rhythms, the creak of leather sandals shifting, the whisper of cloth against skin, the slow exhale of restrained breath. It was a language of endurance, spoken without words. The pounding hammer resumed, somewhere to the north, steady and ceaseless, its sound woven into the fabric of this harsh place like a heartbeat chained to time. Sweat beaded along your temples, running warm and salty down your neck, mixing with the ever-present dust that grated like sand in your throat. The sun climbed relentlessly, its growing heat folding deep into your bones, pressing down with quiet refusal. As you lifted a heavy block, every joint screamed in the slow motion of labor. The rough edges bit sharply into calloused palms, the coarse surface scraping your skin beneath the fabric of your worn garment. Your breath caught with the exertion, drawing in thick, dry air that rasped through parched lips. The movement was methodical, each lift and placement an echo of those before, a rhythm that blurred the edges between day and night, labor and rest. Turning slowly, you caught a flicker, a shadow moving along the far ridge, stretched long, fragmented by the shimmering light. It was impossible to tell if the motion belonged to a person or was merely a trick of the heat. You paused, the block still heavy in your hands, every nerve shifting alert beneath the pressure. The distant shape lingered, a slow whisper promising change, like a soft breath across the sand. A muffled call rose faintly from the center of the camp, breaking the fragile stillness. Heads flicked up like startled birds, eyes narrowing with sudden focus. The tension coiled tighter beneath your skin, a taut strand vibrating with each shallow inhale. You felt the ropes chafe again as you adjusted your fingers, hands trembling with anticipation and fatigue intertwined. The crowd's movement slowed, bodies folding inward like petals pressed against the thirsty earth. Faces marked by exhaustion turned attentively toward the distant figure, whose presence weighed heavily. The authority's voice carried low and gravelly, words clipped but heavy with insinuation, silent warnings carved into every syllable. The space between breaths felt thick as molasses. Time itself seemed to hesitate, stretching long and thin. You stepped forward, each measured movement echoing softly across the sand. The heat dripped down your forehead, tracing stinging paths of salt and grit, and the coarse ropes drew across your wrists with every careful motion. The altar awaited, humble in its stone simplicity, its surface catching faint glimmers from the ascending sun. You knelt slowly, knees pressing into the warm, gritty texture, palms grazing the dark water in the bowl before you. The liquid surface held the shimmer of molten gold, a collective hush. The scent of incense lingered faintly, a bitter trace weaving through the heat, an echo of something old and unyielding. Then, barely perceptible, the air shifted once more. A faint wisp of coldness slipped through the oppressive warmth, swirling gently around your skin and threading through the tightening circle. Your eyes locked onto the horizon, where the heat shimmer bent and rippled, carrying a shape, no longer distant, no longer uncertain. A figure emerged, ragged and deliberate, moving against the light in slow, purposeful strides. The camp fell still, breaths held inside silent cages. Every gaze followed, every muscle tensed, as if caught in the delicate balance between past endurance and the shadowed promise of what future steps might reveal. The presence hung there, a whisper on the wind, waiting to unfold beneath the harsh glare of an unforgiving sun. The sun had climbed higher, its light spreading slowly, almost reluctantly, across the desert, casting long, soft shadows that retreated only slightly as the heat pressed down with ever-increasing insistence. You felt the weight of the day settle onto your shoulders again, the familiar stiffness in your limbs, the dry grit clinging to your skin like a second layer. The rope still bit softly into your wrists, a maddening reminder of the invisible chains that tethered you to this endless toil. Your feet sank slightly into the forgiving sand as you stepped away from the altar, each grain pressing softly between your toes, warm and unyielding. The pile of heavy blocks nearby seemed to wait patiently, their rough surfaces mottled and worn by repeated handling, like stone-faced sentinels guarding the cruel rhythm of your existence. The breeze was faint, carrying with it the scent of burnt clay, mingled with dry earth, twisting lazily around. Your body, like the echo of a forgotten breath. You shut your eyes for a moment, drawing in the stillness that clung to the camp like a fading shadow. Around you, the crowd remained silent, frozen in that peculiar limbo between resignation and restless expectation. The endless hammering resumed, dull and methodical, stitching the background soundscape with the steady thump of stone meeting metal. Every beat drummed deeply within you, setting a tempo for your slow, symbolic, aching movements. The coarse robes of the captives brushed lightly against the cracked ground, footsteps muted by the sun-warmed sand. You reached down, your hands instinctively tracing the familiar roughness of a nearby block. The stone's texture was abrasive, grains twisting against your fingers like dry leaves caught in a forgotten wind. Your skin worn raw in places, pressed into its cold hardness, and for a flicker, you imagined that beneath this weight lay stories, silent, unyielding testimonies to suffering and persistence. You breathed slowly, each inhale thick with dust and the sour sweat that never seemed to fade. The distant figure of the authority shifted subtly in your vision, a dark outline melting into the heat waves rising from the earth. His eyes, distant and unreadable, scanned the prisoners one by one, calculating and unblinking. With every glance, a tightness coiled deeper within your chest, a knot of unease that you could neither ignore nor fully grasp. The stillness felt fragile, as if the camp itself was holding its breath, caught between the past's exhaustion and the unclear shape of what came next. Your body, despite the ever-present ache, moved with deliberate slowness, each motion measured against the burdens of pain and fatigue. The ropes slid marginally against your wrists as you lifted a block, the coarse fibers rasping softly, thereby a dull ache. The weight pressed down heavily in your arms, the edges biting deeper into your flesh beneath the thin cloth covering your skin. You stepped forward, grains of sand slipping quietly beneath your every movement, steady yet reluctant. Your gaze drifted again toward the horizon, where the sun painted a wan palette of gold and burnt orange. The heat waved off the cracked stones, blurring the distance into an undulating mirage, and there, once more at the edge of your vision, the shadow returned. It moved slow and deliberate, a dark smear against the light, a promise or a warning, still distant, yet undeniably close. You felt the subtle tightening of the crowd's collective tension ripple beneath the surface. Faces, marked by constant fatigue and hidden defiance, turned imperceptibly toward the slow shadow, eyes reflecting a blend of dread and hesitant curiosity. The desert air thickened, as if suffocating beneath a growing weight. A faint murmur rolled through the captives, a restless tide of sound barely audible, like dry leaves shifting far away. Your breath, hot and brittle in your throat, matched the rhythm of your heart, a cautious drum, beating with slow purpose. The taste of dust and sweat lingered on your tongue, dry and sharp. Your fingers clenched briefly at the rope, the sting flaring before dulling once again. Somewhere behind you, the hammer's steady pulse faltered briefly, then resumed, heavy and unyielding. As you prepared to set down the block, your attention caught on a small detail, a thin wisp of smoke, barely perceptible, curling from the south, faint yet unmistakable. It drifted lazily on a sudden cooler breeze, bringing with it an edge of something burning that had not been there before. The scent was faint through the dry air. With deliberate intention, you looked up. The shadow at the horizon had taken shape now, taller, more distinct, a ragged figure moving steadily toward the camp. The slow, purposeful stride disrupted the timeless rhythm of the desert, carving a new pulse into the stillness. The captives held their breath collectively, the unspoken tension tightening like a drawn wire. With cautious steps, you followed the figure's approach with your eyes, feeling the slow unraveling of a day that had seemed fixed, inevitable. The breeze carried the faintest sound, like distant cloth brushing against leather, soft and deliberate. The authorities' gaze sharpened, the weight of his silence falling heavily upon the assembly. Time stretched thin around you, each second elongating, like the shadows scattered across the sand. You sensed the fragile boundary between endurance and change pressing close, a silent threshold trembling beneath the desert sun. And just as the figure's rough silhouette reached the rim of the camp, a sudden sharp crack echoed, like stone fracturing beneath unseen pressure. The desert seemed to inhale sharply, and the world narrowed sharply to that single trembling moment. Your skin prickled with a cold spark of certainty. Something irrevocable was about to unfold. You stood frozen as the sharp crack ripped through the quiet, breaking the long-held breath of the camp. The sound lingered, a brittle fracture in the fragile stillness, and you felt it echo deep within your chest, setting every nerve alight with sudden urgency. The shadow that had been moving slowly along the horizon paused, suspended like a fragile thread, trembling in the heat haze. Time seemed to fold around that moment, thick and slow, as if the desert itself was waiting, holding a secret beneath the relentless sun. The dry wind shifted again, brushing across your skin with cold fingers that cut through the day's stifling heat. It carried a scent sharper now, burnt wood, faint and stubborn, entwined with the dryness that clung to your cracked lips. You drew in a slow, deliberate breath, tasting earth, ash, and something new, a whisper of fire yet to come. Your hands twitched against the coarse ropes. The sting pulsed softly with your heartbeat, a cruel metronome marking the uncertain rhythm of what was to come. Around you, the crowd was still, their quiet breaths brushing the air like fragile leaves caught in a reluctant breeze. Eyes narrowed instinctively, following the apparition edging closer with deliberate steps that stirred the heat shimmer like a slow-moving tide. You caught the faintest movement, a glint of worn leather catching stray light, the ragged hem of fabric dancing against brittle skin, a figure carved in quiet desperation and slow resolve. You shifted your weight, coarse sand grain shifting beneath your feet, warmth pressing unevenly between your toes, the roughness beneath your palms, the familiar stone blocks, grounded you, anchoring your body to this unyielding reality. The heavy weight in your arms was a bitter comfort, cold stone biting into tender places, its mass a silent testimony to the endless monotony of toil that shaped your days and nights. The slow pulse of the hammering resumed, steady as ever, a resonant heartbeat against which your own trembled. Sweat prickled your forehead as the sun swelled overhead, its pale light dulled by the haze of dust and smoke. The smell of burnt clay and dry earth wrapped around you like a thick cloak, heavy and uncompromising. Every inhale dragged a taste of bitterness that clung stubbornly to your tongue. You swallowed, the dryness steadying your breath, letting the world narrow to the slow beat of your heart and the faint sounds that threaded through the tension. A soft murmur rose from the circle of captives, a fragile sound swallowed quickly by the sun's unyielding authority. The slow, uneven steps of the approaching figure drew nearer, pressing into the wide open expanse with a silence that was almost a roar. The camp tightened its collective breath, the unspoken tension weaving through every face marked by exhaustion and wary anticipation. You took a hesitant step forward, the ropes rasping softly as your wrists moved. The stale fabric of your garment shifted against the sun-baked skin of your neck, shadows stretching long and wavering beneath the climbing light. Distant clinks and groans from the work area blurred into the background, a dull, constant backdrop to the unfolding stillness around you. The figures stopped at the camp's edge, silhouette framed by the wavering heat, ragged and slow. A faint glimmer of metal caught your eye, the flash of a pendant, dull but deliberate, hanging from the visitor's neck, reflecting a shard of the sun's tempered fire. The moment stretched. Then, with a measured, slow grace, the figure raised a hand, a careful, deliberate gesture that quieted the murmurs into silence again. You felt a shift beneath your ribs, a subtle tightening like the desert air itself, knitting together the threads of dread and fragile hope. The heavy, bitter weight in your gut twisted, the whisper of change skeined tightly through your veins. Behind the figure, dust rose in thin columns, swept by the stubborn wind that brushed past your chest. The camp's shadows lengthened, folding over tired bodies as the sun's climb slowed, hesitating like a breath held too long. You lowered the stone blocks slowly, arms aching as the rough surface scraped softly against worn skin. The coarse grains underfoot settled around your boots like reluctant witnesses, shifting quietly in endless rhythm. The ropes on your wrists teased the edges of pain, the sting sharp but familiar, a reminder carved deep into muscle and bone. Your gaze flickered back to the altar, the cracked sandstone haloed in amber light. The bowl there sat patiently, still and dark, catching the nuanced glow of the sun refracted through dust. You imagined the surface as a threshold, a silent mirror awaiting the next slow step in this unyielding ritual. A faint rattle traced the air, small, almost mist, the whispered promise of movement deeper in the camp. You tensed again, breath catching subtly, the dry crackle of your throat mingling with the murmured wind. Eyes met briefly across the circle, tired, distant, but alive with quiet understanding. No words passed between you, only the shared weight of countless afternoons soaked in heat and silence, layered with the unrelenting pulse of survival. The figure stepped forward once more, its shadow merging with the gathering dusk beneath the climbing sun. Each slow stride was a careful sentence in an unspoken story, a measured proclamation of change in a place where time had seemed frozen in endless toil. And then, as if summoned by that tension, a faint ripple of movement stirred far beyond the camp's edge, a soft, dark shape unfolding slowly, hesitating on the precipice of the unknown. You caught your breath, the harsh wind carrying a scent unfamiliar, bittersweet, like embered leaves falling quietly in the gathering twilight. The desert held its breath once more, stretched taut between what was known and a shadow moving closer with deliberate inevitability. You felt it then, a slow pulse beneath the surface, the fragile knot of what lay just beyond sight, waiting to unfold like a secret whispered into the scorching silence. You stood motionless, the heavy air pressing on your chest like a stone, every breath drawn shallow and slow. The figure at the horizon edged steadily closer, its ragged outline sharpening against the wavering heat. The sun, unforgiving and pale, dipped toward its zenith and cast stretched shadows that clung to the cracked earth like silent witnesses. The faint scent of smoke lingered stubbornly, carried by a teasing breeze that whispered promises both bitter and strange. Your wrists throbbed where the coarse ropes beat into your skin, shifted softly, warm and unyielding, settling, cushioning, and oppressive all at once. You flexed your toes slowly, feeling the uneven pressure as particles pressed between the cracks of your worn sandals, the minute sensation cutting through the vast dullness. The camp around you seemed suspended in time, breaths held tight like fragile threads straining in a gathering storm. Murmurs faded into the vast stillness. Only the distant, steady clatter of hammers kept the relentless pace of this harsh world alive. The rattling sound echoed, soft, taut, unbroken, a pulse threading through the thick silence. Your eyes flicked toward the circle of captives, faces marked by exhaustion and quiet dread, muscles taut beneath sun-scorched skin. A subtle shift passed through them, barely perceptible, but heavy with unspoken meaning. You traced a slow, deliberate path back toward your place among the stones. It might betray you. Rough flagstones pressed unevenly into your feet, their sun-warmed surfaces burning lightly beneath your soles. The sand slipped softly beneath your weight, weaving at once a cloak of invisibility and a cage of binding. The ropes around your wrists creaked quietly, a low, uneven sound against the merciless pulse of the desert's heartbeat. Your hands grazed the rough stone blocks stacked nearby, their surfaces mottled with dust and wear. You lingered on the rough edges, fingertips brushing over tiny pits and lines etched by countless days of ceaseless labor. The cold hardness grounded you, steady as a slow breath, even as the heat climbed mercilessly, baking the air and drawing sweat from your brow. A faint wisp of wind stirred, carrying the sharp scent of burning earth, acrid and raw beneath layers of dry dust and sweat, curling around your ember. Across the camp, eyes flickered toward the approaching shape, drawn taut by a collective tension that tightened with each slow step the figure took. The ragged traveler cut through the rising mirage, slow and unwavering, like an ancient shadow trudging softly across a forgotten realm. The murmurs had ceased, swallowed by the weight of waiting. Each breath was careful, restrained, a thin thread coiling beneath your ribs. The authority figure's gaze hardened, scanning the captives with cold calculation, a steady force amidst the gathering unease. Somewhere, barely audible beneath the hum of steady hammer blows, a faint rattle traced the hot air, the scrape of loose sand shifting beneath uncertain footsteps. You shifted your weight again, the ropes tugging tight, skin stinging beneath the coarse fibers. The oppressive heat bore down, as if the sun itself slowly before the altar, the warmth of the sandstone biting gently into your knees and palms. The dark bowl of water waited silently, surface smooth and still, reflecting molten light like a hidden depth beneath the blistering sky. Your fingertips hovered, brushing the liquid's cool embrace as you fought to steady the tremor threading through your arms. The simmering tension wrapped tight around your chest, heavy and quiet, like a vast and unspoken burden. A faint rustle rose from the edges of the camp, swift and subtle, as if the dry earth itself was shifting beneath the steady gaze of the sun. Your eyes flicked toward the source, catching the low silhouette of something moving just beyond sight. The scent carried by the wind sharpened, now unmistakably filled with the bitter trace of smoke, like a fire long dying or newly born, hanging in the air like a whispered threat. You swallowed the dryness lodged deep in your throat and steady your breath, tasting the brittle grit that clung stubbornly despite all attempts to clear it. The slow beat of your heart echoed beneath the relentless sun, a fragile counterpoint to the distant pounding of hammers and the softer, closer scrape of shifting sand. The camp's shadowed faces turned in subtle unison, eyes narrowing with cautious anticipation. The figure at the horizon halted suddenly, breaking the rhythm of slow steps, a pause heavy with silent weight. The faint glint of metal, a worn pendant catching the light, flashed briefly, a shard of fire swallowed by dust. The shadow stretched long and cold, folded beneath the sun's oppressive glare. The air thickened, charged by a quiet tension that seemed to tighten the very fabric of the desert. You rose slowly, the ropes rasping against raw wrists, as you bent beneath the invisible pressure of expectation. The heavy blocks tucked neatly beside the altar seemed to pause with you, their rough outlines softened in the haze of heat and light. The faint smell of incense, now thin and bitter, wove through the currents of hot air like a shadowed memory, lingering just out of reach. A sudden stillness spread, like the hush that falls just before dusk. You could feel the dust settling slowly around your boots, the grains pressing softly against the fabric of your clothes, the world narrowing to this charged heartbeat of waiting. The slow pulse of tension traced fire against your skin, a smear of heat mingling with cold doubt. The faintest, almost imperceptible murmur rose like distant thunder at the edges of consciousness, then fell away. And then, as if carried on the wind itself, a low sound broke the silence. A whispered cry, shattering in a brittle rasp that snapped sharp against the dust-heavy air. All heads turned, eyes wide and searching, drawn to the horizon, where the shadow moved once again, steadier now, bearing itself with the heavy certainty of an approaching storm. You felt the fragile threads of endurance begin to unravel, the slow unraveling that promised change, a slow burning beneath the endless sky, a faint pulse of what was to come, spiraling, woven tightly into the waiting desert heat. You stood frozen as the sharp crack still echoed faintly in your ears, the brittle fracture now settling into the vast silence that had reclaimed the camp. The shadowed figure at the horizon, the slow, deliberate traveler, paused, as if weighing the invisible weight it carried across the shimmering sands. The sun climbed higher, its light softening into a hazy glow that bathed the desert in warmth, not harsh but forgiving, like a tender embrace easing the scars of a long day. Your wrists throbbed with every beat of your heart, the coarse ropes biting gently but insistently into raw skin, tugging reminders of endurance and captivity. Yet beneath the ache, a subtle stirring began, a fragile pulse of something new weaving through the exhaustion. The worn sand beneath your feet shifted softly as you adjusted your stance. Grains pressing welcomingly between your toes, grounding you to this moment of inevitability. The arduous rhythm of hammer on stone dulled into a slower cadence, becoming less a clamor and more a heartbeat syncing with your own. Around you, the circle of captives held silently, faces etched with weariness, eyes wide yet shadowed with hope, an unspoken pact forged in the crucible of shared suffering. The air thickened, not with the weight of despair, but with the quiet promise of change. The figure moved forward now, slower but certain, crossing the edge of the camp where the cracked stones met the shifting sands. Your gaze locked with theirs, ragged, resolute, carrying the dust of countless miles and the fire of a will unbroken. The pendant glinted softly in the diffuse sun, not a token of privilege, but a talisman of survival, of the scars worn openly like medals of resilience. Soft winds stirred, whispering through frayed cloth and coarse robes, carrying with them the faint scent of smoke and earth reborn. The bitterness of dry sweat gave way, almost imperceptibly, to a hint of something fertile in the air. A breath drawn in collective unison, long held and now slowly exhaled. You felt the ropes loosen slightly, the fibers uncoiling, with a gentle sigh, as if the desert itself had granted a reprieve. Hands once. Bound moved with careful grace, touching the rough sandstone altar, now warmed by the tender sun, the bowl of still water catching molten reflections like liquid gold, ready to mirror the dawn of a new chapter. A murmur rose, quietly at first, threading through the resting breaths of those present, until it blossomed into a collective exhale, a release measured and full of unspoken relief. The tense shadows softened. Faces relaxed with the slow sinking of shoulders, weighed down no longer by invisible chains. Your eyes traced the intricate dance of dust motes suspended in the glowing light, each a tiny universe caught in the tranquil stillness. The spider on the stone block, a small creature defiant against the vast desert, crawled onward, an unassuming symbol of persistence in the face of relentless odds. The traveler approached the altar, offering an outstretched hand that was met not with fear, but with a shared understanding born of hardship and awaited change. Fingers once unyieldingly bound, now met in a quiet clasp. No words were spoken, none were needed. The moment held, a testament to survival, to the endurance of the human spirit beneath unforgiving suns. As the ritual reached its gentle conclusion, a hush fell again, deeper and somehow softer, like the desert itself was folding its ancient arms around the weary souls within its grasp. The sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the sky with strokes of muted amber and smoky rose, casting long shadows that seemed no longer sharp edges, but soft blankets, draping the camp in restful quiet. You settled back onto the warm sand, the earth beneath steady and familiar, no longer an adversary, but a silent companion, bearing the long story of your days. The ropes lay slack, their previous bite subdued too, a fading memory brushed away by the cooling breeze. Around you, fellow captives exchanged glances soft with tentative smiles, their strength renewed by the harbingers of possibility that stirred just beyond the dunes. The distant hammering ceased altogether, replaced by the delicate rustle of wind through dry leaves, the whisper of peace settling over the land like a gentle balm. Your eyelids grew heavy, the steady cadence of the day now melting softly into the lullaby of night approaching, a soothing rhythm crafted by the sigh of sand and the slow descent of sun. Every breath you drew was laden, not with bitter dust alone, but with the quiet certainty that this was not an ending, but a turning, a threshold crossed beneath skies that knew heavier hearts. You wrapped the fading warmth around yourself like a fragile cloak, the desert night preparing to cradle you gently. And just like that, the harsh lines of the day softened into shadows that swayed with peaceful intent, the silence folding you into an embrace, both dark and comforting. Your gaze drifted upward, tracing the first stars softly piercing twilight's veil. Steadfast sentinels, watching over a world weathered but unbroken. With one last, slow breath, savoring the cool night air, you let yourself drift, the sand beneath steadying your frame as the quiet hum of the earth lulled you toward rest. This was the end of the day, of the labor and of the waiting. Yet beneath the stillness blossomed a seed, small, hidden, resolute, inviting you to close your eyes, to dream lightly, and to awaken someday beneath gentler suns. The desert exhaled, and so did you.